Hello everybody, and thank you all very, very much for coming. So this session is a bit different. I realise the rest of the conference is all very technically oriented. This one is a mixture of business and technical. Yeah. So if I'm just letting you know, so if you're really looking for an in-depth technical session only on the technology, this is not for you. But if you are interested in psychology, data visualization, and the business, then this session is for you. Okay, good, thank you. So what I wanted really to talk about is I love data. I assume everyone else does as well. But for me, it's not just about storing the data. Now, I read recently that 50% of the world's databases are not used. Yeah, so you have all these DBAs and they're just constantly storing data, and only 4% of the world's information is analysed. And I think the reason for that is people don't know how to present data and they don't know what to do with it. Now, data has a story. Sometimes it has a story that people like and they want to see, and sometimes they don't like what the data says. That is a people issue. They just won't accept it. And they might say something like, I don't believe that chart, I don't like how it looks. And what they actually mean is, I don't like what that chart says. Yeah. So data visualization, and particularly big data, is actually a very complex area. And the reason for that is it involves people. Now, we can all see, even by the way we are all dressed, that we all have different tastes and different thoughts about what looks good and what doesn't look good. Data visualization is also the same. Everyone does things differently. So what I want to do really is give you some insights into the science and the art and the psychology of why visualizing your data is important and how to try to make the best decisions over doing it. Yeah. So who am I? Well, my name is Jen Stirrup. I'm an analyst and a practitioner, and I basically love data, and that's really what I do. Everything else steps from that. I am Scottish. I hope everyone can get the accent. So I can't change the accent, I'm afraid. So I present regularly just because I like the sound of my own voice talking about data. It's mainly what I like to do. All right. So straight away here, you'll see patterns, right? What you'll see is you see at the top left-hand side, it looks like the data is ascending. These are just very simple patterns with balls. Don't worry about what the data actually means. It's more about you can use your eyes and you see these patterns very, very quickly. So when we're analysing data, we're looking for patterns and insights. And what we try to do is we try to use the visual system in order to understand the data. We use our vision a lot for lots of different things, and particularly when we analyse pictures and reports and charts. But what we can do is we can use our psychology and our perception in order to try and emphasise and make the data visualisation nice and clear. So of our brains, 70% of our sense processing in our brain is dedicated to visual processing. It's such an important sense. The other 30% are dedicated to the other senses. So how do we get relationships in our data? So these are very simple examples. Now, we have at the top left-hand side nominal comparison. It's very interesting that people want to compare data. And what we can see in the right-hand side is deviation. So the pattern jumps out at us. There's something different about that middle line, isn't there? And then we have time. People want to analyse things over time. They will want to do that in any business intelligence solution. And when we look at big data sources, you'll probably find there's so much insight involved in the time there. But if you don't visualise that data properly, what can happen is you lose the insights, because people can't see it, so they can't understand it. So we have got part-to-whole relationships. My favourite, not really actually, the pie chart. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we've got correlation, where we try to work out what goes together and what doesn't go together. We also rank as well. It's something that we do quite commonly. We try to work out what's the top 5, what's the top 10. Because sometimes, no matter what your data size actually is, whether you've got a big data source or not, people just often in BI, they simply want the top 10, the top 20, the top 5. It's a good place to start. We're also interested in the relationships in the data as well. What goes with what? And when we give people numbers, what we find is they don't always see the patterns in them very easily. And that's why tables are important, because they give us detail, but it also means that you lose the patterns in the data. Now, I know everybody talks about this phrase, the Internet of Things. I'm not actually that keen on that phrase, the Internet of Things. I prefer Peter Hinson's phrase. He talks about the network of things. And what he really means is putting data together from devices or from customers and putting them together to get insights. It's not just about the data from the device. It's also about trying to work out the insights in that data. But if you can't portray those insights, you can't see the patterns in them very well. You need some way of making these stand out. Yeah. Now that we've done that, hope you can see that. The 9s are all in red. So we use colour very, very simply as a way of categorising. Has anybody here played with a Rubik's Cube? Yeah, you remember the Rubik's Cube? I should have brought one with me. It's a small cube, and basically you try and make the colours all match. And it's actually very simple. It looks deceptively simple. It's a game of colour categorisation, but it's just an illustrative example of how we categorise by colour. And we do it very, very simply when we look at charts and graphs. So, and the colour usually means something. So red usually means that's a loss. Green might mean that that's something that's a good thing. But when we put red and green together, that can often mean that colourblind people can't see it very well. So that can make things difficult as well. Now, in terms of data visualisation, what we have obviously is more data, but as we keep hearing, it's not just about the size of the data, it's also about the velocity of the data. It's moving very fast. We're constantly getting new data. It's also, I think, primarily about the shape of the data. When people talk about big data, that means different things to different people. I've had customers tell me that anything that doesn't fit in an Excel worksheet is big data, right? I don't know if customers tell you the same thing, but that's what they tell me. So the thing is that we're becoming overwhelmed by big data all the time. So what we can see here is that the volume of data is increasing at such a huge rate. And it's not only that, but the shape of it. So if we take an example of something like weblogs, there are lots and lots of very chatty weblogs giving us lots of data, but how do you put that data together with other pieces of data in order to give you those insights? You also have to try and make the data sensible to people. So here we have lots of examples of data diversity. Now, in data science, they tend to say 80% of the time is spent cleaning the data, and the other 20% of the time is spent complaining about cleaning the data. Right? And I think that's actually a bit true, because data visualization should not be used as a tool to hide mistakes. They will only come back and bite you on the bottom at a later date, right? So if I were you, really think about the cleansing, making that data clean. Now, having big data means it can be quite difficult to know what to measure. Yeah. So it's all about choosing the metrics wisely. I don't know about you, but when I speak to customers and I ask them, so what would you like to see in this data visualization? They'll say things like, well, I want to see the last 5 years of data, I want to see 161 columns, and I want it all in one page. And you say, well, how does that work? Because if it's 5 years of grain data, 160 columns, that's going to be sheets and sheets worth of reports. So when you ask business users, they tend to say they want everything. Yeah, does anyone have that? I tend to think business customers tend to only do ands. They've got a really funny logic. They don't do ors, they never do nots, right? It's only ands. It's all they ever do. And it's about trying to give them the data visualizations that will impact them and empower them. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Ben Schneiderman. He's done some wonderful work where he talks about how to try to make the data digestible for business users. So what we have there is normally people, first of all, and there's a body of psychological research to support this, they look for the summary first. Yeah. So give them the headline. Very often CIOs only want the top 5 numbers. Certainly the people I speak to who are CIO, CXO level, they just want to see 5 things. And they want to zoom in on the 1 or 2 numbers which are causing them problems. So try to adjust your metrics depending on who you speak to. The second level is about zooming and filtering. So Ben Schneiderman calls this the golden mantra of information visualization. And what people want to do there is they want to start to burrow into those 5 numbers. And that tends to be your middle tier management layer. They will want to zoom and filter. Now your operational team, they will want the detail. So that's all about trying to structure your dashboards and your reports so that you go from summary down to zoom and filter and then down to the detail. Don't try to mix the two, because if you do, you're mixing messages to that audience and it makes it quite difficult for them to know where to draw their eye. Okay. So here's an example. I was going to talk about Tableau and also Power BI. I'll introduce them at a later date, but the idea is about visualizing the data. It really makes the data sing. Now, there's some really good examples of ways in which data visualization has gone wrong. So there's a gentleman by the name of Edward Tufte, and what Edward Tufte talks about is that, I don't know if you remember the Challenger disaster in 1986. It was the rocket that disintegrated, and it killed all 7 astronauts on board, including the first female civilian to go in an aircraft. Now, when the NASA engineers actually and the NASA decision makers made the decision to put the rocket in the sky that day, their data visualizations looked terrible. They looked like a box of crayons. And I think the message of the data was not clear to the business users. They couldn't actually understand what the data was saying. And I think because they couldn't understand the message of the data, they made the wrong decision that day. And the wrong decision, of course, was to send the rocket up into the sky. And we all know what happened after that. So it's all about trying to get data visualization right for that particular audience at that time. Okay. So I'm just going to give you a quick demo, and we'll have a look at Tableau and we'll look at Power BI. But before we do, just some quick examples. Now, big data means that you can measure pretty much everything that you choose to. But that is really useful for the business user. Now, business users, when you talk to them, what would you like to see on the canvas? They tend to say things like, well, I don't really know what I want. Yeah, give me everything. And I tend to use Malcolm Gladwell's distinction about business puzzles and business mysteries. So a business puzzle is where you have a very well-defined question with a very well-defined answer. Tell me the sales in this region for last month. Very well-defined. Now, lots of software will give you that puzzle answer. Excel is a good example. Yeah. So does anybody here work in organizations which have Excel all over the place? Okay, for those of you that don't have your hand up, you've just not found it yet. There will be some, right? So they're just hiding it from you. It's in people's email, right? So I'm telling you that because a lot of organizations can't get the data that they want, and they start befriending DBAs to give them Excel data files and one thing and the other. So Excel is a great tool for giving you puzzles. It's also got legs throughout the organization. It will walk, and it will walk out of the organization very easily. But what we're trying to do is give people the ability to answer business mysteries. And a business mystery is a bit like Donald Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns. You don't know what you don't know, right? And what that really means is you don't have a well-defined question and you don't have a well-defined answer. So let's take a very loose general business questions such as, why do customers leave us and go to another brand? That's a very difficult question to answer in one sentence. Yeah. What we have to do there is give people the tools to analyze the data themselves. Because otherwise, if you think of the mess that people will make in Excel, and they will, you probably have war stories about Excel and what people do with it. Think of the mess they can make with big data. So just a short example, I had a customer who told me they had a big data problem because their relational database was no longer working. So I said to them, why is that then? And they said, well, it was SQL Server. The SQL Server log file is going to take 3 days to write out to disk, and it will be something like 15 terabytes in size. And I said, can you just double check that your query is correct? They said, yes, our query is correct, and they got quite upset that I dared insult them that they couldn't write a SQL query. So they went off, and then they came back a week later and said, well, actually, we found our SQL query join was incorrect, and they had done a huge Cartesian join. So the data had just exploded, basically. So the thing is that when you don't always understand the business understanding of the data, then that can cause quite a huge technological ramification, because you could have gone down that big data path when actually the users were doing something wrong. Yeah. So when we try to visualize data, is we want to give people interactivity. Yeah. We also want to give them a balance between visualizing the data and not making too many mistakes. It's a bit like Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility, right? We want to give people some power, but no responsibility. You don't want them to destroy anything, yeah? Because ultimately, it will be you that has to pick up the problem in the end. So here's a quick example. We can see we've filtered the data here. I'll just move to the demo in a moment. We don't have to have 3D, and we don't have to have really, really bright colors for something to be effective. So this is just a small example of a summary dashboard which has been done in Tableau, and we see very quickly that there are patterns in the data that we have here. And we're moving from left to right. So we've got something called the golden rectangle in design. And what we try to do is try and shape everything so that it follows the Fibonacci sequence, actually. I'll see if I can find you a quick example of how that works. If you bear with me a second, I'm just going to swap screens around so it goes to my demo. Sorry. Oops, sorry, wrong one. There we go. I'll just try and make this a bit smaller. All right, I hope you can see that. Now, this is not mine. I want to credit the gentleman who did this. His name is Dr. Andrew Abella, and his website is extremepresentation.com. Yeah, I just believe in giving people credit where it's due. And if you look at this site, you will save yourself so much time. I think this is a wonderful chart chooser. It's a great starting point, and if you use something like this, it will make you more effective at visualizing your data, regardless of its size and regardless of the technology. It's all about the thought that goes into the data. So what I tend to see everywhere is people using pie charts. And they use pie charts primarily because they don't know what else to use. So they get overused. So the thing with pie charts is they use area and they use angles. And our human perception system is made such that we're not very good at judging area or angles. And we're not good at judging them together. So with pie charts, if you have any more than 5 segments, people find them quite difficult to interpret. It's also more difficult to interpret if this is a pie chart, if you move away from 12 o'clock, it gets harder and harder to quantify what the slice actually means. Now, the thing with that is, and you can do this with people in the workplace, next time you show a pie chart to your colleagues, point to the pie slice down the bottom and watch them tilt their heads. Yeah? And you see them do it. And the reason they're doing it is they're trying to change their 12 o'clock axis, right? And that's why they do it. Now, I once held a conference in the UK, and when I was speaking, I showed people a pie chart. I took off all the labels and said, what does this actually mean? The answer was 40%, but everyone in the audience shouted out everything from 15% right through to 55%. And this was a data-savvy audience who could not read a pie chart, right? So when you think about what that does to your business users, I really think don't just stick with the pie chart, which is why I'm recommending you think about this. Yeah. So what people are very good at, they're very good at reading the length of a line, and they're very good at judging height and length. It's something that we do with the primitives in our visual perceptive system, something we do very, very quickly. We're also very quick at discerning colour, and we're not quite as quick at discerning area and angles. So that's why on bar charts and line charts are very effective and very simple ways of representing data. There was a study recently showed that 1 in 10 Americans have actually got problems in eyesight that go beyond long-sightedness and short-sightedness. Your colleagues may have eyesight problems but just not chosen to share that with you. Yeah, it's just one of these things. And I think what's so interesting and so difficult about data visualization is it's not about you, and it's not actually what you think. It's about what your audience thinks. When you're a DBA or dealing with data, very often you are you're the sign-off. You know what's right and what's wrong. But when you deal with these grey areas, it makes it more difficult. So I recommend, just as a starting point, regardless of the size of the data, Dr. Abella's chart chooser is a great place to start. So So as a basis for the data, what we have here is the Hotworks Sandbox. I assume most of you have at least downloaded or played with it if you don't have Hotworks already. I found it a great way to learn about big data and to learn about the various technologies that is pre-configured. There are other ones there, but this is just my personal preference, and that's why I've showed you this one. Now, the nice thing about the Hotworks Sandbox is it gives you an ODBC connection, which you can download from their site. And if you have an ODBC connection, you can link up your Excel to your Hotworks Sandbox. And what's nice about that is it gives you a nice, toy, safe environment to play around in. And I don't know about you, I learn by breaking things and then putting them together again. I never read manuals until the end, and then I work out what I did wrong. So then it's a very practical way of learning. So using the ODBC driver, we can start to put data in Power BI. So, come back. So Power BI, has anybody used it here? Most people familiar with it? Some are, some not. Okay, a few hands and some people shaking heads. So don't worry. Power BI is all about trying to answer that business mystery. Yeah. So the way that it's a Microsoft product, and what's nice about it, I think, is it tries to solve the business mystery, but it also allows people to visualize their data in Excel. Because let's face it, Excel is it's used by 1.3 billion people. And it's 30 years old this year. Can you believe that's 30 years of spreadsheets? Yeah? That's a lot of spreadsheets. And I love Excel, don't get me wrong, I do love Excel, but I'm not sure about the way it's used sometimes. Someone last year sent me a Christmas card, which they had done in Excel, and it was really nice. But I thought, why have they spent so much time creating this wonderful Christmas card? So you pressed like little buttons on it and it flashed little lights depending on the colours. I mean, it was a real work of art. So people use Excel for all sorts of weird things. But business users live and breathe by it. They will live by pivot tables. But in seeing the detail, they don't always see the bigger picture. And sometimes you just need that trend, that starting point. So the data source I've used here is the Human Development Index. And what we're trying to show here, very, very simple line charts. We're trying to show how the human development has changed over the years. So that's just a very simple example. But in the right-hand side, what we have here is we could use high human development. So we can see high human development are places like Albania and Nigeria. But when we click on very high human development, what we can start to see is that we get a different colour. So immediately our perception system starts to categorise, oh, this is yellow, that's orange. Those two are different things. And you're leveraging the visual perceptive system to try and make the message of the data as simple as possible. So then when we start to compare the very high and the very low human development, we've changed the colours, but we start to see some patterns emerging. So we can see that on the middle line, we've got Argentina, Australia, and Austria. Their lines are much higher. And then we see the purple lines are a bit lower in terms of value. Now, this is actually called a trellis chart. And what a trellis chart is, it's a way of getting around 3D. I don't know about you, but people use 3D quite a lot. And you used to see it in Excel all the time. You'd land and it would give you this 3D thing. Now, the problem is, I said earlier, 1 in 10 Americans, for example, have got eyesight problems. People don't always understand 3D very well. Yeah. And it sometimes can occlude data too. But what this very simple pattern does is it allows you to compare vertically and compare horizontally. And that's something that as humans we're very, very good at doing very, very quickly, looking along and down. Very, very simple ways of trying to make the message of the data as clear and simple as possible. So this is what Power BI also gives you is the ability to do maps. Now what it does do, it goes off to Bing and goes and gets the maps from Bing. Now this is a really, really simple map, but sometimes the message of the data, it doesn't need to be overdressed. Simplicity, sometimes making things simple is actually really hard for other people. You know, so to make the message really stand out. Now this is a really small chart, and what it does do is gives you the difference between very high development and very low human development. So we see the purple is all concentrated around Africa. So these are the regions where human development is not considered to be as high as it is, as we can see in the Northern Hemisphere or in America. Now the Human Development Index is actually just a data sample which I've taken from the World Data Bank. And what it does do, they take data from lots of charities and try to work out how is the world advancing and progressing so that everybody has sanitation, education, access to water, clean drinking water. So when we visualize this, we use color very, very simply in order to try and categorize very simply. We can see all of the low development over Africa. So with that, I'm just going to move on to Tableau. Oops. Oh, sorry, before I move forward, I should show you that's the end result. But if you want to see the data source, what the way that Microsoft work at the moment is you can load the data into Power Pivot, and then you can visualize the data based on the Power Pivot. Now, what Power Pivot gives you is the ability to mash different data sources together. So it can use Hadoop, it can use Hotworks, for example, but it can also take data from other sources as well. Because as people want to move forward and analyze the data, they want to enrich it and add in new data sources to make it more interesting. And my own personal opinion is when we talk about the Internet of Things, we will also start to see people wanting to add data in with those devices as well. Tell me about the weather in that area at that time. Tell me about the pollution, something like that. If you're looking at healthcare, for example, and that would really make your data sets much more rich. For those of you that are interested, what Power Pivot is actually an analysis services cube and SQL Server underneath the hood. And it's a very fast prototyping tool as well. So sometimes if you're building like a data warehouse or something like that, I use Power Pivot just to show the customer something, just to give them a little sample of data to say, go away and play with that. Because very often, when you're building data warehouses, for example, it's difficult for the customer to know where to start. So I give them a small sample of data. They don't always know what they want, but they're usually very, very good at telling you what they don't like, right? So if that's your starting point, you can start to rule out things more quickly. So just a tip there to try and accelerate development. So let's bring... So Tableau is actually grew as it's different software. Has everybody here seen the film Toy Story? But Buzz and Toy Story. A few fans. Pixar. Yeah. So Woody and Buzz and all that. Well, that software was actually created by a number of professors from Stanford, and they created the software that creates the characters basically, Buzz and whatnot. And then they did the stuff at Pixar, and then thought, well, how can we apply the same principles to data? So Tableau was born. It was born from Buzz and Buzz Lightyear and Woody. So it's worth downloading the software and having a look at it. It's very interesting software and it's fun to play with. Okay. So it's just taking a little minute to load. So here's an example when it loads, which has been taken from the Tableau website. I just showed it because it was such a nice example. Here we are. So this is just an example from the Tableau website. I just took it because I thought it was such a nice example, and it relates obviously to the same data. But what I think I like about it is the fact it looks attractive to the eye, and we've used the trellis chart again so you can compare up and down quite simply. And all it's doing is comparing the Human Development Index for various countries, and you can do it vertically and also horizontally as well. Now you can also motion is also very important in understanding data. If you've all seen the Hans Rosling video, he talks about Gapminder, and he talks about life expectancy across the world. And you can see how it changes over time. So we can see that. We can start to see that there are changes in places. If you look at Iraq down the bottom, some of the indexes start to increase and decrease over time. See France suddenly increasing. So when we start to look at this, business users can start to engage with the data. And we get an idea from the top of actually where we are. I'm just going to stop that. Now, the nice thing about Tableau is it's all very drag and drop. So down the left-hand side, you just pick the metrics that you're looking for and just drag them onto the canvas. And it's something that's really quite simple to do. Sorry. But sometimes it can get a bit confusing if there's too much detail on it. So when we go back to Tableau, sorry, my machine is a bit slow at the moment. I'll quickly show you how that works. Now, this is aimed at the business user. It's all about trying to let them to visualize their data in a very safe environment. And when we're looking at big data, it's about trying to stop them making a big mess, because that might happen as well. So I don't know if you can see that properly. I'm going to change the colors. I think that doesn't come up very well on the screen, actually. I'll show you a different example. Now, the key, I think, to Tableau's success is you've got this little panel here, which is the Show Me panel, and basically it gives you different ways to visualize the data. So all you do is you drag your data onto the page. So here we've got the value, the year, and the country name, and then we can start to filter that data to make it a bit more sensible. We don't want all of them. Let's just take the latest year, 2013. Okay. So what we can start to see here is this is called a bubble chart. And what it does do is it gives you the ability just to, we've got the year for the label there, we'll take that off. So if we want to do that in the left-hand side, I just drag it, it's gone. And then it starts to become more clear, just simply because we've dragged and dropped. Now, if you're a business user, that's very easy to do. They'll do that without thinking about it, once they've got the hang of the drag and the drop. And I think what the beauty of this sort of technique is for big data is about trying to make it digestible for those business users, to make it as simple as possible. We could also add the colour in as well. So we could put country name and colour. Now, business users love this sort of thing. They love really, really bright colours. And it may not give you much in terms of the actual detail, but when you're visualising data, you just sometimes want to give them the pattern. So we can see the example here of HDI for Belarus and Austria was much bigger than it was for places like Japan, Italy, and Denmark. All right. So with that, I wondered, just to summarise, so what we've talked a bit about is not just... Big data is not just about the variety. Everyone's doing the 3 Vs or the 10 Vs these days. But I think it's actually really important to recognise the business users in amongst all of this and how you get the story of the data out of the big data. It's not just about storing it. There's plenty of talk about that. It's about how do you make insights from it. And the key to that is visualising your data. So the summary is don't use 3D. Use your colours wisely. Don't use pie charts everywhere. There are other ways of doing it. Have a look at Dr. Abella's chart chooser for a great start. That will apply across the board to different technologies. I've just given you a few examples of how business users might interact with some big data sources, just to make the data as insightful as quickly as possible. So with that, does anyone have any questions? Oh, all right. Well, thank you very much for coming, and I hope you've enjoyed the session, and I'll see you for the rest of the day. Thank you.